When large jobs require moving massive amounts of snow, get the work done quickly and efficiently with the Western Pile Driver and all-new Pile Driver XL pusher plows, both featuring Trace Edge technology. These pushers scrape down to the pavement with an advanced cutting-edge system that has independent 2-foot sections that move vertically, oscillate, and trip. Get more jobs done faster with the Western Pile Driver lineup of pusher plows.
Mike Bott from Frost Solutions, one of the owners of the company. What we do is provide a mini weather station to give you a tailored forecast to those particular locations so you know where and when and what to do in those parts of town. You know there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different ways that people can experience tremendous value having a technology like this.
Welcome to the Entrepreneurial Journey with your host, Dave Westcott. The Entrepreneurial Journey is a weekly podcast that streams live every Tuesday at 9:15 a.m. Pacific on Dave's YouTube channel and LinkedIn profile. Now here's Dave with this week's episode.
Good morning and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Journey. I'm your host, Dave Westcott, and I've got with me special guest Tom Schwab, founder of the Interview Valet. Tom, good morning and thanks for being on the show.
Dave, I am thrilled to be here.
You know, I love working with somebody who in their bio says, I have 1,500 clients. That is a lot of clients.
Well,
how do you have time to be on this show this morning?
Well, I was going to say, I've served 1,500 clients. At any one time, we've got about 150 select clients, right? Because some of the clients just come on, they're promoting a nonfiction book, right? They don't need to be on podcasts, but, you know, what we call a guest storm for about 3 months. Some of them have built the business up, right? I loved it when we lose clients because they got purchased by a bigger company and a conglomerate, right? So all of those things. But the one thing that all of our clients have in common is they see the problem in the world, right? They're like, this is the problem. Here's how I see the solution. And they want to share that with people. They realize they're one conversation away, not one funnel away.
I love that. I love solving the problem. I would say on this show, I've probably learned more from the guests than I have in my 25 years in business. What is the Interview Valet?
Sure. So let's start with the problem. I believe that people's biggest problem today is their ideal client doesn't know about them, right? So it's an attention thing. But then it's also a trust thing, right? We only work with people we trust. And so what Interview Valet does is it uses a tactic, right? A strategy that has always worked, but it uses it with modern technology, right? So the way that people used to grow their business was from personal referrals, right? Get introduced by a thought leader, go speak at the Chamber of Commerce, speak at the country club, speak at the Rotary Club, right? This idea of leveraging other people's audience. What Interview Valet does is that same thing, but through podcast interviews. So we work with thought leaders to find the right audience for them, the right podcasts. Then we prepare them for it. And then we get them up on there on stage, right? So they can go to the podcast, share their viewpoint, the point of view, what they do for the world, right? And it's this idea of talking, and marketing should be magnetic, right? It should attract your right people and repel those that aren't a great fit. So it's this idea of a lot of times it's founder-led marketing of going out and getting your story out there.
Now, everybody wants to start a podcast. Like, you know, this is what, you know, it's always on the chat groups. You know, I'm on several business chat groups, and I must see 3 or 4 times a day somebody say, well, you know, if I'm going to get my business going, I got to get a podcast going. I got to get a podcast. I've been thinking about getting a podcast going. I want to get a podcast going. I guess what's more important, starting a podcast or being a podcast guest?
Well, I'm going to push it back. It's not an either or. It's what are your goals, right? Should you be an Uber driver or an Uber passenger? It's the same platform, but it's different goals, right? So If you want to nurture your current clients, if you want to nurture your current leads, well, then for all, more power to you, start a podcast, right? Because it's a great way that you can speak directly to them. But if you want to get new leads, if you want to get new exposure, well, you're going to have to go on other people's stages. And that's where being a guest is, right? And the other thing that I always point out is that there's a fact in podcasting. It's a dirty little secret. It's called pod fade. Most podcasts, in fact, 80% of podcasts die within the first 10 episodes. It's really easy to start a podcast. It's hard to keep it going, right? It's a commitment. And so a lot of times people will work with us and they'll start testing it as a guest, right? So they'll get out there and do I like the medium, finding my voice, seeing what other podcasters do, and they'll start with guesting and then they'll go on to start their own podcast too. So I really don't think it's an either or. We always start with, what are you trying to accomplish with this?
Why do podcasts die in the first 10 episodes? Have you found any trend or any anomaly, or what have you found?
Well, from a lot of conversations and a lot of experience, look at life, right? So starting something is easy. And especially now with podcasting, the tools are easier, right? And I think if I asked anybody, right, what are you going to talk about, right? They could probably give me the first 10 topics, right? Or I could say, who are you going to interview? They'd probably give me 10 names. But then after that, it starts to slow down. And we see it. Most podcasters start looking for guests from us once they hit about 24, 25 podcasts, because they've started to burn out their network of people that they want to, right? And then the other thing too is just think about life, right? If I've got to show up week in and week out to do something, that's a commitment, right? And then all of a sudden, well, summer vacation starts and I miss a week, and a week turns into 2 weeks, or the year-end holidays, right? It gets busy. I'm not going to put out a podcast this week. I'll start it back up in the new year, and it just starts to die. And that's sort of what you can see. You'll see people start with a weekly podcast, and then they'll miss a couple of weeks, and then they'll do another one, and it's just sort of a slow death. And that's one of the things I will always encourage people is, if you're going to start something, make the commitment to do it for a year, right? And I'll give you an example on this. Early on with podcasters, I did what I call this daily shout out. And every day I do a video on social media to one podcaster that I was listening to. And I thought, this is great. And this was probably about 2018. And I did it for probably the better part of 2 months. And it was like crickets. I didn't get anything. I didn't realize that anybody was doing it. And I had queued them up. And I think I had maybe 90 in the queue that I had. I went to a podcasting conference, and all these people started to come up to me and thank me. Hey, thank you so much for doing this. Or someone else would say, hey, could you do mine as a shout out? And it's like, I got to get back home to do more of these, because I didn't realize the impact they were having. And I think the other thing about podcasting is so many people get stuck in the metrics, right? Not the matrix, but the metrics. And they'll do all of the work, and then they'll look and say, well, only 20 people have downloaded this, or, I'm not Joe Rogan after 30 days, and they get discouraged with it. And it's like, in some ways, I wish they wouldn't show them the metrics for the first year, but I would push back, and it's like, there's 20 people that follow you every week. They look forward to what you're saying, right? And why don't you serve them really well, because they'll tell 2 friends, and so on and so on. So I think it's a multi-factorial thing of why most podcasts die. But I think if all of us look in our mirror, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of things in life that I've started, and they just sort of died off.
No, I think that's fantastic. It's like a marathon, right? Like, and And the entrepreneurial journey is a marathon, and podcasting is a marathon. Anything you want to do, you got to put a lot of time into it. Do you see more success in a podcast that's going to be recorded live? You mean it's going live to the audience, or do you see more success in a record, do some editing, and a release? What works better in your mind?
I think it can be both, right?
Okay.
Because I've seen people that will do it live and share it with their community. And today it's so easy to push it out to all the different social media. And so let people in on the live event, right? Then the flip side is then take it, put the intro, the outro on, maybe edit it ever so slightly. Then you can release it again, because the people that are listening to it live probably aren't the same ones that are listening to it 6 weeks later. Or if they did, they'll catch something else from it. And so I think the biggest thing there in my mind is the commitment, right? If you say that you're going to be here every Tuesday to do a live, you got to be there every Tuesday, right? And I think that can be very tough. One of the things that I've heard a lot of people encourage podcasters is have 10 of them recorded before you launch, because inevitably life is going to get messed up, right? Somebody's going to get sick. You're going to get called away on a business trip. You get a chance for a once in a lifetime opportunity, right? If you've got some already in the can that you can put in there, it'll make it so much easier. So I think a podcast is a commitment. Doing a live podcast each week is even a higher level of commitment.
It's tough. I think the sustainability of the live is tough because of all of the things that you mentioned. Now, you're also an author. You have tell us a little bit about your book and what inspired you to write the book.
So the book is called Podcast Guest Profits: How to Grow Your Business with an Interview Strategy. It was inspired by another book by a guy by the name of Jamie J. of Quit Repeating Yourself. And I love Jamie's thing. He's like, document the things, share it with people. You don't have to keep repeating it. And early on, when I wrote the book, I was telling people, this is the system that we use in order to turn podcast interviews into results, into profits, right? And it's the idea of, it's not magic. It's not a secret. No, it's a system that we've tested. And so I was giving this to people that I knew, and then somebody said, why don't you make it into a full book? So with the help of a friend of mine, actually he's now the CEO of Morgan James Publishing, Nick Pavlidis, I brought the book to life there. And so many people said, well, why would you write a book and tell people exactly what you do? And I'm like, well, I guess for the same reason that a chef writes a cookbook, right? There's certain people that will read it, they'll follow it, and they'll get great results. There's other people like me that will try to follow it and don't like the results, right? There's other people that'll just say, wow, this person really understands it. I want to go to their restaurant. I want to work with their company. And the other thing is that we've got an updated version of that book that we're working on right now, because with any book, right, it's like that snapshot in time. When that book was published, that's everything we knew at the time. And as soon as it got published, we started to learn more and more. So we're always trying to update there. But at the end of the day, I know that being introduced to different ideas and different people can change lives, right? In my mind, that's the greatest gift you can ever give someone, right? To introduce them to a new idea or a new person. And podcasts do that. And so if anybody's on a podcast, I want them to get great results, right? For them, for the audience, for the host. It's not about just if you work with Interview Valet. So it's the system that we put out there. And I'm very proud that the stuff that we talk about, I see the rest of the industry starting to use. And I'm like, great. It helps all of us.
I love that. That's really, really good. I'm thinking about people who, want to start a podcast, and I see, I'm just going to pick this. coaches, if I want to be an executive coach, or I want to be a business coach, and I want to get out there, and I want to get in front of people, and I want to, share my story, and share what I've got going on, is podcasting, being a guest, interview valet, is that a good place for me as a coach?
The way I always look at it is there's a few factors. One, can you serve a regional or a national or even global audience, right? If everybody's got to be within driving distance to you, podcasts are a very inefficient way, right? You'll be talking to the world, but it'll be inefficient there. The next thing is, are we talking about a relationship sale or a transaction, right? If it's just, I'm trying to sell a $2 widget, people don't have to know, like, and trust you, right? Sell that on TikTok Shop. But if it takes a conversation, podcast interviews are a great way for that. And then the final one is, I think, to look at it and say, is this something that takes an explanation? Is this something that I've got a unique point of view on? Because that is where podcasts will set you apart, right? Because if I'm just selling, I'm a life and business coach for men and women, right? There's nothing interesting. Bueller, right? Or as I always like, I'm the full service digital marketing agency serving small and medium sized businesses. That told me nothing, right? Yeah. But if you've got a point of view, if you're like, I am the business coach that helps business owners thrive, not only in their business, but in their family, in their life, in their health, because I think it's all intertwined, right? If you've got a strong point of view like that, man, go out on podcast interviews, and that's going to relate with the right people, right? You cannot tell that story in a Facebook post or in a Google ad, right? That's something that you've got to explain to people. And I always call it, it's the missionary zeal, right? Of I've got to change the world. I've got to save the world. The people that have that missionary zeal to their business, they do the best, right? If it's just, I want more small and medium-sized businesses, more leads for my full-service digital agency, that's not interesting on a podcast.
Very, very interesting stuff. So let's just kind of follow this theme, right? So let's say I'm a coach, and I'm, and I want to get my name out there, and so I speak with you, and maybe I do have that kind of Bueller thing going on. When I work with you, do you help craft this message? Do you help bring this to life? How does it work?
Yes. And even for people that are media trained, right? They say, oh, I've been on radio and TV before. Well, podcasts are different, right? Podcasts are about stories, about a point of view. And we'll have some people that'll come to us and say, I've done 50 interviews already, and I didn't get results from them. Well, I start to listen to them, and I'm like, you didn't do 50 interviews. You did one interview 50 times.
Wow.
And all that you ever told, right? All that you ever told was your origin story. Interesting, but it's not going to drive anyone to it. So we really talk with them of, like, first of all, who's your ideal customer, right? Eddie Yoon wrote a book called Super Consumers, and his argument is always market to your super consumers because they'll tell everyone, right? So who are the people you want to talk to, right? What podcasts do they listen to? And we use a lot of data around that, right? I can tell you from some of the databases that we license that everybody that goes to this website, here's the podcast they listen to. If they go to this conference, here's the podcast they listen to. And so you don't want to talk to everyone. You just want to talk to the people that your point of view matters. So finding that. Then the next thing is, what topics are we going to discuss, right? Too many people just do the same interview over and over. And what we're finding now is that not only are your ideal clients listening to podcasts, but so are the AI engines, right?
Really?
Go to ChatGPT now, and click on, like, Google your name, Google your company, and then look down in sources. And where they're pulling from is Wikipedia, if you've got that, your own website, Amazon, if you've got a book. And then largely after that is all long form collaborative content, right? The founder of ChatGPT, OpenAI, Sam Altman, last year said that 57% of the internet is AI created, right? So most of the internet is a rehash of a rehash. So people are turning to long form collaborative content, right? Discussions like this. And so are the large language models. And I really believe that going forward, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, all of those will be our best referral sources because it's a personal referral, right? I have a conversation with ChatGPT and it says, oh, no, you should work with Dave, right? Dave is the great person in this industry. In fact, here's the link to his podcast. To me, that's a personal referral now, not just an SEO thing when I'm clicking through.
Wow, that's powerful. So no wonder you are the godfather of podcast interview marketing. You have been labeled the Godfather. I love it. I love the movie The Godfather, so I guess it just resonates. But that's really impactful information. How did you get this title? How did you get this moving forward? The Godfather of podcast interview marketing. How did that come about?
Well, when you're known as the Godfather or something, and you're early on, you're either will be seen as really stupid or a trendsetter. So my last company was HubSpot's first e-commerce case study, right?
Okay.
I built a company up from a regional player to a national leader, sold it off, and people said, well, how'd you do it? And I'm like, guest blogging. But this was 2014, and I'm like, guest blogs don't work anymore, right? So I hypothesized, Dave, that you could use podcast interviews the same way, get that know, like, and trust. And so we started to test it, and it worked really well. So much so that I wrote a cheesy little PDF and did a course. And I never took the course out of beta because the people that were honest with me, they're like, I don't want to learn how to do this. I want you to do it. Just let me be the guest. So we beta tested it, and one of our early beta testers actually bought me the URL Interview Valet. He's like, this is what you should call it. Here's the name. So that first few years as we were out there evangelizing to use podcast interviews as a marketing channel, I'd give my elevator pitch and people would look at me and say, what's a podcast? And at that point I was like, I am too early on this. But it gave us the chance to figure out the systems and the processes. And then about 2019, when podcasts really started to take off, so did the market, right? And then when COVID hit, when people realized that other avenues were shut down to them, right? They couldn't go to trade shows. They couldn't speak from stages. They thought, oh, could we use podcast interviews, digital stages? And that really proved that it works for, thought leaders, coaches, consultants, professional services. And we do a lot with category designers too, where they're trying to bring something new to market. So after all of that, one client called me the fairy godmother of podcast guesting. Carrie Wilkerson is such a sweet lady. I'm like, I'll own it. Somebody else called me the OG. And at first I thought, oh, that means the old guy. And it's like, oh, the original gangster, I'll take that too. All I know is that we've tested, we continue to refine it. And I'm more excited about the power of podcast interviews today than I ever have been, right? Because before we were talking to people, now we're talking to the large language models too.
Walk me through this know, like, trust. How do I convey that to the audience in a show, in a podcast? Like, let's say I get hooked up with you and I'm ready to go and you put me out there. How am I conveying know, like, trust? And then I guess secondarily, I'll back that up with, how do I continue to change my story? Because that feels like it gets uncomfortable.
Okay, great question. So that know, like, and trust. So some of that comes from being introduced by the podcast host, right? You are the micro influencer here, right? Nobody came to this podcast because Tom Schwab was on it, right? No, they like Dave. They like the quality of his podcast, the people he brings. So you're that micro influencer. You're the one running the party. So by you having me here, introducing me, gets, a little bit of the halo effect on there, right?
Okay.
So that starts from the very beginning, right? If I started my own podcast or my own conference, right? None of your friends would be coming because it's like, well, Dave's not there. So that's the beginning of the know, like, trust. The next one is when you get on a podcast, remember, nobody cares about you. Nobody cares about your product or service. What they care about is their problem, right? And early on, a client helped me with this. This is my last company. I was covering the phones at lunch, and he's like, "I love you guys. You're just like Preparation H." And I'm like, "We're like hemorrhoid cream?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's a compliment, right? You came recommended. You gave me fast relief." And that's when I recognized that nobody cares about our product or service. They care about their problems. So in the podcast interview, always go back to that, right? What problem am I here trying to solve? What do I believe? And be very clear in that, right? At the very beginning, you asked me about Interview Valet. I said, we believe this. We're one conversation away, not one funnel away. These are the kind of people we work with. To be clear with that, because when somebody's listening to a podcast interview, you want it to be magnetic, right? Attract the right people, repel the people that aren't perfect, right? For you. And so being clear in your message, being clear in your stories, being clear in the people that you talk about as examples of success you've had, that will attract the right people. And other people will be like, interesting, but not for me. Too often, I think now, in digital marketing, what they're telling us is more, right? How many times a day do we get emails that say, Dave, I can get you 30 qualified leads this month? Well, we're not optimizing for leads. We're not optimizing for Facebook likes or anything like that. We're optimizing for ideal customers that value what we do. And that drives impact, that drives profit. So I think that know, like, and trust is to be clear with what you're doing. Now, your question about how do you make it specific for each audience, right, is to not just talk about your background story, but figure out who the audience is, giving examples that are particular to them, right? And so that old thing of content is king, but context is God. So if you're on a podcast that is talking to coaches, use example from coaches, right? If you're on a podcast that is for startup software entrepreneurs, right? Use examples from there to make it more specific. And I'll give you an example here. One of the clients we worked with early on, this guy is a genius when it comes to taxes and tax savings for business owners. And one of the things that we work with them on is like, okay, what are you going to offer people afterwards to move them from being a passive listener to an active visitor to an engaged lead? And he had this, 10 tips on how to lower your taxes for a business owner. Well, Dave, he started to change it around. So if he was on a show for dentists, it would be, just come back here and we've got the 10 tips for dentists to lower their tax rate. He's on a show for, say, service professionals, home service professionals.
Yep.
Right. He may say, come back here and we've got 10 tips for home service professionals to lower your taxes. Right. And so they may be in the same 10 tips, right? Maybe they changed around slightly, but it wasn't just generic. He had the stuff for them. So when people heard him, they're like, oh, Craig, he works with home service professionals, right? The examples that he used
Yeah.
were around that. It was very applicable to them. They didn't have to start connecting the dots.
I love it. I think that's good. I like the way that you're starting to think about your audience and you're really trying to dive into the audience versus 10 tips. Let's get 10 tips for dentists. Let's get 10 tips for asphalt paving guys, whatever it is. You're putting that together. Now, interestingly enough, you've talked a lot about stories. I'd love to hear a story that you have about success and about how someone comes and works with you and what happens for them.
Yeah, I think the ones that touch me the most are what I call humble heroes, right?
Okay.
We've got people in this world that are influencers and then practitioners, right? And the influencers are the beautiful people that are buying their way on social media, right? These are the people that were DEI experts and then they became crypto experts and now they're AI experts, right? They don't need help getting promoted out there. They'll promote themselves. The ones that I like to work with are these humble practitioners. And I can think of one that was a coach, right? He was just known in the Nashville area there, right? He had a following there. But
Sure.
his name was also the name of an NFL football player, right? So if you Googled him, you found the NFL football player. The name of his company was the same as a 1990s movie. And so if you Google this company, you got this like 1990s movie. But he had stuff that he could help people with, right? And so we started to work with him, right? And how can you get this message out there and to the right audience, right? He was a business coach and we got him on a podcast called 40 Plus Fitness. And I'll never forget, he's like, I'm not a fitness guy. I'm like, no, but what you teach is that you've got to have balance, right? And your ideal people are 40 to 50. They're business owners. They've sacrificed a lot. And he gets on this podcast, Dave, and he's like, it doesn't help you if you make your first 30 if you make your first million by 30 years old, if you make your first 40, or if you make your first widow by the age of 40. That podcast converted better for him than any, right?
Really?
Because he was teaching work-life balance, right? And he had the people there that he was talking to, right? He wasn't just going on the same podcast with every other business coach out there. And so it worked really well. We worked with him on the different offers he could have. And so this gentleman went from being just a regional player in Nashville to fast forward 2 years later, he had filled up all of his one-on-one coaching and he didn't want to turn people away. So he started to do masterminds. And 2 years later, he had 15 paid masterminds. Each one had about 8 guys in it, and that they each were probably paying about $400 a month to be in it. You can do the math on what the recurring revenue is. Now, fast forward now, he's got people that were in the groups that are leading the groups, and he's just out there being the evangelist for the point of view for how they can help people. And I think that's great because you can take somebody that could have a great impact if people just knew about them, and to get them out on podcasts so that they can start to talk about what they do, what they believe, and draw people to them. And the other thing that we've seen from companies that we've worked with, Fortune 100 companies to solopreneurs, is they're like, the sales process is quicker, right? Because it's not really a sales conversation. After they've heard you, they've listened to a couple other podcast interviews, they're pre-sold. It's more of a qualification. So it's just one of the benefits of that sales process as opposed to just getting, cold emails. There's some things today that are very, very efficient, like cold email, but they're not effective.
I love what you guys are doing. I mean, you got my own wheels turning. Like I love the approach that you're taking. I love how you spun that around. I love how you put him on that show and, change the way he thought about things too, right? Because I mean, now his mind is opened up to a completely different way of doing business. What would you say is the number one thing that anybody who is thinking about starting a podcast or even being a guest on a podcast should be doing right now?
Valuing their own insights, right? One of my favorite quotes is, what's ordinary to you is amazing to others, right? Most of us, we discount what we know and overestimate what other people know, right? And so we'll get people that say, well, I don't know about a podcast. What would I talk about on the podcast? Or what would I talk about as a podcast guest? And when they start to have that doubt, I'm like, oh, you're going to be perfect, right? Because you're going to focus on bringing value every time, right? The people that just want to pontificate, they're more the influencers or the experts, right? So I would look at that and say, what do I know that could help other people, right? And a friend of mine helped me with this, right? Most of us would say, well, I'm not an expert. Well, if you look at the legal definition of an expert, it's somebody that, based on their knowledge, their education, their life experiences, knows more than the other person, or than the average person. And now some people are like experts that have PhDs, right? They don't do well on podcasts because chances are they're not, it's not applicable. Then there's the people that are the Sherpas that have been to the mountains, right? Old people with gray hair like me, right? That can say, oh, this is how, we've done it for the last 20 years. There's expertise in there. But there's also expertise in that person that is just a little bit ahead of you, right? That understands what you're going through. So you don't have to have gray hair to be an expert. You don't have to have a PhD to have expertise that you can help someone, right? And so I think often the people that could be the best hosts, the people that could be the best guests, are the ones that have the doubt. And I'm like, great, we can work with that. And we'll pull that message out of you. We'll find the ideal audience. We'll continue to refine that. And once they get over that, it becomes fun, right? Even introverts, right? What's the two things we love to talk about? Our kids and our business. And that's redundant, right? Because often our business is like one of our kids, right? So we have expertise in that, and that's where people can really share it. So I would urge you, right? If you have doubts, just remember, what's ordinary to you is amazing to others.
That's it. That's a great tip. I love it. Now, I'm a big believer in helping the audience. I'm a big believer in being real with the audience. And I believe that, what's the point in having a show if I'm not going to get something out of it? Like, I need one or two nuggets that I got to take with me that are going to say, wow, this is really impactful. This is really going to change, the way that I think about this. So, for the sake of the audience, we're talking about podcasting. We're talking about starting a podcasting. I've been doing this, for, quite some time now. I've got a couple hundred episodes under my belt. But I'm going to expose myself. What can I do better? Like, what would be a learning lesson from the audience just on this show here today?
Okay. I think what you're doing is amazing, right? And it works for you. Continue to do it more. And I didn't think you were going to go there with the question, but the same advice I'm going to give for the audience, I'll give to you, is right now, it's not just about education, right? Education without action is just entertainment. And I'm not that entertaining. But think, what are 5 audiences that I could talk to, that I could add value, and that would be my ideal people? Now, they may be on a podcast, right? They also may be at a small community group, right? If you're local, right, maybe it is the Rotary Club. But where can you tap into other people's audiences there? Because I think that is a lesson we have lost. Maybe we've been sold other things, right? Marketing now is trying to teach us how to go out and get more and more and more. Why don't we figure out where those stocked pools are, right? Where are my ideal clients? Who has access to them right away? And how can I get myself there and talk to them? So wherever that is. And today the data is out there too. So you can say, of all the people that listen to the entrepreneurial journey, what other podcasts do they listen to? Right. So that would be your ideal customers there, because it's not a zero sum game. Right. If you're
Yep.
like, well, I buy a booth at this conference every year, right, and I spend a fortune to fly there and stand there. Well, why don't you go and run the report and say, of everybody that goes to this conference, what podcasts do they listen to? Because that'd be a much cheaper, easier way to get in front of them. But I think the big thing here is, how can you tap into audiences? And I said 5, right? So many
Yep.
people have start with your dream 100 list. Well, why? Right?
Yeah.
More is not better. Better is better. Right? Start with 5, and you may get on 2 of those. Okay, that's fine. Do a good job. And at the end say, hey, I love sharing my message, sharing my insights. Do you know any other audiences that I would be good for? Right? Podcasters know podcasters. Event organizers know event organizers. Right? And so if
Yep.
they start introducing you, it's what's the old television commercial, right? And they told 2 friends, and so on and so on. That will fill your dance card, right? You don't have to start with, here's the dream 1000, or there's something out there right now. I cringe when I see it. It's like, you can pitch 1,000 podcasts in the time it would take you to pitch one. I'm like, well, what good does that do, right?
Yeah.
You could send out 1 million resumes in the time that it would take you to talk to one employer. Let's see which one gets you further on there, right?
Right.
So I think focusing on that quantity over just quality.
I love the common sense approach. Now, if you remember it, or you might not at this point, what question did you think I was going to ask you?
I thought it was going to be, what can the audience do,
Oh,
right?
what can the audience do? Let's answer that question.
I'm gonna
I mean,
say
you
the same
kind of
one.
did.
Yeah, and it's basic, right? So many times in marketing, we want to make it sound like it's so complicated, right? Nuclear power, right? That was my first job out of college, right? And
Yeah.
they boiled it down so it was simple, right? You do this, so you heat up water, so you make steam, so the ship goes through there, right? And I think too many of us try making our digital marketing or our business more complicated than nuclear power, right? Of like, boil it down. How did you get your last client? How did you get your last ideal client? Oh, it came from a personal referral. Oh, great. Well, how can you get more personal referrals? I don't know. Well, why don't you see if that person has an event, if they're having a luncheon, a dinner party, if they've got a podcast, right? All that thing of, how can you tap into their audience to get more of those? And, will that work for Amazon to take their business, to grow at 20%? Probably not, right? But for most, I call them small E entrepreneurs, right? Can that take you from 6 figures to 7 figures? Oh, yeah. Can it take you from 7 to 8? Oh, yeah. Can it take you from 8 to 9? I don't know. You'll probably get acquired between 8 to 9 on that, right? Because of some conversation or somebody that knew you. So there's a line that I remember somebody saying years ago, well, Elon Musk wouldn't do that. Well, I'm not Elon Musk, right?
Yeah.
So I know what
Yep.
works for me, and this has gotten me to 6, 7, 8 figures.
Yeah, it does. You brought up the nuclear power plant work, and that has to have you thinking differently than most people out there. How do you think different than the average person based on the experiences that you've had?
I warn all of our prospects and our clients that I'm an engineer by degree, right? So I'm always testing, I'm always evaluating, and there's a Thomism we've gotten at the company that the team repeats back to me: in God we trust, everyone else bring data. So
I love that.
I start looking at things and say, okay, well, does this make sense? How can we test this? What's the process here? Right? We've been doing it for 10 years and we're always refining that process and to make it work better and work today. And I think so many people today in marketing or in business, they want to help people, but let me give you an example here. Dave, if I tell you, Dave, I just went to the grocery store and go to line number 2, right? Line number 2 went the fastest. You should always go to line number 2. Am I lying to you? No, I want to help you. Yeah. But you've got to see that we're in a different market, right? You're in a market in Washington State. I'm in one in Michigan, and it's a different time, right? So the better question is, well, why did that work? Right? Why do you think line number 2 was the quickest? Oh, well, let's see. Line number 1, there was a woman with lots and lots of kids, right? And then line number 3 had somebody that was in a wheelchair, and so line number 2 was the fastest. Okay, so it's not line number 2. Look where the people are going to move the fastest. And so I think in marketing and in business, sometimes it's trying to get the lesson from it, right? What's the underlying thing here, as opposed to I'm going to copy the same thing the other person did. And I think some of it is that fear of missing out, right? This is how Brendan Burchard made his business. This is how Tony Robbins did it. These people up there that have their 2 comma club. This is how they did it. Well, why don't you figure out what worked for them and pull the lessons from that and apply those?
I love it. So I've got 2 final questions for you here before we bring this in for a landing. If you had a billboard and the whole world could see it, and it was just your white space and it was blank, what would you put on that billboard and why?
It's the same thing that I've been putting on my signature line for about 18 months. It's stay strong. The world needs to hear you now more than ever. And I think I put it on there as a reminder to myself, but also to other people, right? And it's got nothing to do with business. It's got everything to do with having a rich business and a rich life, right? We're all one conversation away. And sometimes it's hard to have those conversations. We need to stay strong and the world needs to hear us, right?
Yeah.
There are people right now that are praying for your product or your service, right? I don't care if it's a version 1.0 or version 10.0, right? It's exactly what they need. And they don't have it because they don't know about you. There's other ones where it's like, stay strong. There's a lot of things going on in the world, right? Well, go out there and give your point of view of here's the problem, here's the solution, here's how I think we can fix it, right? I think the world needs more conversations and less arguments. And that's one of the things that I promote to people. I believe deeply, and that's one of the things at Interview Valet that we allow people to do, right?
Yep.
We'll help you have those conversations with the people that matter.
Man, that's fantastic. That's a great answer. I love it. I think that's billboard worthy for sure. What final tips would you leave our audience with? They are entrepreneurs. They may not all be podcasters, but I'm sure that most people have thought about being on a podcast, starting a podcast, doing something with podcasting. What final tip would you leave our audience today?
Well, I was going to say, I don't want to just give you a tip, right? Let me give you some resources here.
All right.
If you go to interviewvalet.com /journey, right? Everything we talk about will be on there. There's an assessment, right? 10 questions. Will podcast interview marketing work for you? It doesn't work for everyone, right? If somebody tells you that one size fits all, they're either lying to you or they're themselves, right? So you can find it there. You were nice enough to mention the book. You can buy it on Amazon. But if you go back there, I'll send you a copy, right? If you're outside the US, I'll email you a copy. And then finally, if you want to talk about this, if you want to connect, I'll put all of my calendar scheduling link there, all my social media, all that will be back there at interviewvalet.com/journey. And something we talked about before that you brought up. This isn't just entertainment. This isn't just education. Take action on it, right?
Yeah.
Because the world needs to hear you.
Yeah. I love it. So you kind of touched on it a little bit. You said your social media channels are out there. They can find them. Where do you hang out on social media the most? Is it LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram? Where are you hanging out?
I hang out on LinkedIn, right?
Okay.
Thank God my company has younger people that understand Instagram and TikTok, and they put Interview Valet up there. But for me, it's a lot of LinkedIn, and the newest one that I've really been enjoying is Substack. I think there's some great conversations going out there on Substack, and I've learned a lot there.
All right. I've never heard of Substack, so now I've got to go research something. Now I got some homework. Now I got some action items. Okay, you're hanging out on LinkedIn. I'm hanging out on LinkedIn too. LinkedIn's a great place to connect. Listen, if you're out there in the audience, connect with Tom on LinkedIn. Check him out. Follow his profile. Give him a like. Give him a share. Touch base with him. Great to get those followers out there. And check out the website like he mentioned. Go take a look. Take the 10 question form. Fill it out. Go through it. Like, why not do the assessment? It's free, right? There's no cost to the assessment.
It is.
All right. Well, that's a no-brainer. And how long do you think the assessment takes? Is it 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
It's under 5 minutes, right?
Under 5 minutes.
It's 10 questions. There's a couple open-ended ones, but most of them are, select from the drop-down.
So get out there, do it, see if you're ready to take the leap, because I know you're all thinking about it, right? Everybody is thinking about podcasts. I see it all the time. So get out there, take the journey, connect with Tom, take it to the next level, have some fun. This has been the Entrepreneurial Journey. I'm your host, Dave Westcott. Follow me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, anywhere where it's social. I'm going to check out Substack and see what's going on down there. I'm not quite ready for TikTok yet. We're working our way in that direction, just like Tom is. At the end of the day, we're back 9:15 a.m. Pacific Standard Time every single week. Give us a like, give us a share, drop your comments into the comment box. I love to hear what you have to say. Tom, you've been absolutely wonderful on this show. Thank you so much. It's been a privilege and an honor to chat with you.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate what you do.
Thank you, sir.
Mike Bott from Frost Solutions, one of the owners of the company. What we do is provide a mini weather station to give you a tailored forecast to those particular locations, so you know where and when and what to do in those parts of town. There's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different ways that people can experience tremendous value having a technology like this.
Introducing the all-new Western Enforcer V-Plow. Engineered with all the features, efficiency, and performance of full-size Western V-Plows, built specifically for your half-ton truck. For more information, visit westernplows.com.